All right, so Ed O'Keefe is with us now from Washington. Ed, you know, some critics have really questioned why Lucy Flores is speaking out now as Biden prepares, of course, for possible 2020 bid. What more do we know about her and her decision to come forward at this time?
Yeah, so a former assemblywoman from Nevada who was running in 2014 to be lieutenant governor of the Silver State and ultimately lost big time, was part of a rally there hosted by the Latino Victory Project that was also designed to boost some other Las Vegas area Democrats who were running for Congress and also lost in a really tough year for the party. And look, she, before this, had a reputation in Nevada as a bit of a truth teller, a bomb thrower, and someone who isn't necessarily the favorite of establishment party leaders, not only in Nevada, but across the country. And yet she makes a pretty compelling point here that as the party is considering who it is that should be their nominee, behavior like this should be a factor. She wants it to be. She thinks it should be. And now it certainly is. And went to great lengths over the weekend to clarify that nothing that the former vice president did was sexual assault or anything like that, just inappropriate, and that she felt that he was violating her space.
Yeah, and in an interview that she gave to Politico, she said it's so easy to Google creepy Biden and come up with numerous instances of former Vice President Biden interacting with women that looking at it on YouTube would seem to be inappropriate. But he is, as you know, leading some of the early 2020 polling, even though he obviously hasn't officially announced that he's running for president. So what is this allegation doing to his potential campaign launch? What are the folks around Vice President Biden saying?
Well, they went to great lengths over the weekend to sort of, clarify this situation and say, look, he's aware of it. He knows and he's acknowledged in some of his recent speeches that he has a campaign style that some see as approachable or personable, intimate, some say creepy. And it's something that he's certainly aware of. I think it's more so what he does today and in the days ahead that will determine really where this is going. And the fact that he's having to do this while not even yet an official candidate, I think, is a sign, A, of his front-runner status, even though he's not a declared candidate, and B, the drawbacks to waiting longer. All the guidance we've received is that he is going to make it official at some point, probably this month. Initially, it was as early as next week. Now it's looking like it'll be at some point just after Easter, which would basically be the last full week of the month. If it slips any more than that, we're going into May, and I think there will be a lot more questions about why he's waiting and what he's waiting for. Although he would point out, his team points out, that history is on their side. Candidates haven't declared this early, this soon in a presidential cycle in the past, at least those that ended up winning. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump waited until June and July of 2015. Barack Obama did it early and won, but George W. Bush and Al Gore and others waited until later in the year, and so Biden has been wanting to wait. And because he doesn't have a formal campaign operation in place, like a Senate re-election campaign or a gubernatorial campaign operation that he can turn into a presidential campaign, whenever he gives his aides, his would-be staffers the signal that he wants to do it, it's still going to take them something like 3 or 4 weeks to actually get the operation up and running. And to have to do that while potentially facing accusations like this one will be really tricky, I would think.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, at least the way things seem to be unfolding now, the longer he waits, the more there's a likelihood that people will bring stuff up and he can't sort of officially respond. And I'm thinking about his response to Anita Hill, and
Right.
that people, there's already sort of backlash with his response that he wishes he could do more. And they're sort of starting to lump it in with this conversation here with Flores, with Lucy Flores. I'm wondering if waiting is going to do more harm than good for him.
It potentially could, and I think the only way we'll be able to measure that is if there's some poll, as unreliable as these early polls are, if there is some kind of survey, either in an early primary state or among Democrats nationally, that suddenly starts to see his support shrinking. It's usually, right now, Biden on top, followed by Bernie Sanders, and some combination of Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or Beto O'Rourke. If that line change switches up at all in the coming days, and there's some reason to believe it has something to do with this, it would certainly expose him as vulnerable. And the fact that there are so many Democrats running, despite the fact that he's planning to get in, I think is a signal that they believe that he is vulnerable and won't necessarily maintain that front-runner status once he gets in. There's that old adage that your best day is your first day. And I think already there are signs that that would be the case for the former vice president.
Ed, before we let you go, let me ask you about Mayor Pete Buttigieg. The mayor of South Bend, Indiana, has raised around $7 million for his 2020 presidential campaign. So when you look at those numbers, how seriously should we take him as a potential nominee at this point?
Sure. So the reason we now know this is because the first fundraising quarter ended last evening. And so at this point, official campaign spending reports are due by April 15th. But we know that candidates usually start releasing the information themselves in the days before that deadline in order to get some good news. In this case, he believes he's raised a little over $7 million, which you might think, so what? Well, remember, a month ago, most Democrats didn't know who this guy was and couldn't pronounce his last name. Most Americans probably still don't know who he is and can pronounce his last name. But for somebody who was essentially scratching, not showing up at all as a factor, but has enjoyed a bounce now in the last month, to be able to raise $7 million in a month is pretty good. But set that against this. Remember, Beto O'Rourke on his first day raised about $6.5 million, so nearly the same sum in one day. And when all is said and done, we expect that Bernie Sanders may have raised close to $30 million this quarter. So it's a notable sum for a virtual unknown, and a sign that, if you have a moment of some kind, and in the case of Mayor Pete, it was a CNN town hall that really sort of propelled him into the conversation a bit more than it had been before, you can potentially reap the benefits. And it also shows that this is still an incredibly unsettled race.
Indeed. Ed O'Keefe. Thank you, Ed.
Take care, guys.
Well, later today on CBSN, my colleague Tanya Rivero will speak to former candidate for Nevada Lieutenant Governor Lucy Flores about her allegation against former Vice President Joe Biden. You can see that interview later this afternoon.